exercise.
That's right. I've been exercising all day today.
How you doing?
Sit down.
All righty, I think we're all here. Mrs. Moore is absent this evening, obviously, out of the country.
For your daughter's wedding.
Daughter's wedding,
Yeah,
that's
so
pretty cool.
congratulations. Yeah.
So at this time, we'll go ahead and do roll call.
Flamini,
Yep.
Thunderbird,
Here.
Johnson,
Here.
Lopez,
Here.
McFarland,
Here and voiceless.
and Zimmers.
Here.
That is 6 present.
Okay, President's comments. You're going to hear me talk about this every board meeting up until the time school starts. I've been talking about it quite a bit, but I'm going to keep reminding people about immunizations and physicals. Our balanced calendar schools start July 21st, so if you're have a kindergartner going to one of these schools, you need to make sure before that date that you have that taken care of. Our regular schools start August 18th, our regular calendar schools. And so again, if you have a 6th grader going to middle school or a 9th grader going to high school, you need to make sure you get those physicals and immunizations taken care of. And also, there may be others that need immunizations that are not in those grades that also need to get them taken care of. We have been working really closely with the medical community, SIU, Salmon County Department of Health, and other organizations in town to give us assistance with this. We do have 2 dates in the school district, August 4th and 5th. This would be middle school registration. And students that are in need of a physical, we're going to have providers stationed at those 2 schools. If you're an elementary student or even a high school student, you can come to either Jefferson or Washington on those 2 dates and get a physical and immunization. So I want to keep bringing this up so people know it. We've been sending out press releases. The nurses and the parent educators and social workers, they've been putting out flyers to the community to make sure people are aware of this. So we're really kind of hitting it hard. We're trying to get the numbers down from last year. We never want that to happen again, so we're going to keep repeating this every meeting that we have. The second thing I want to talk about, a couple of Sundays ago, my wife and I watched this program on Sunday morning on CBS, and they highlighted a teacher, a high school teacher, and I can't remember what state she was from, about how she took this young lady under her wing that had been in a series of foster homes over the years. This young lady was now a high school student. This teacher readily admitted, and the student did also, that this student was very difficult when she had her in class, but this teacher saw something in this student that struck a bell with her that made her think that this student had potential. So she stuck with her, she mentored her, she kind of took her under her wing. This student just graduated from college, with the help of this teacher. My point for bringing this up, we have teachers in this district every day in every school that do similar things, that they help kids, that they make a difference in kids' lives. I'm very proud of the staff we have in Springfield. If you can make a difference in one kid's life in your lifetime of teaching, I think you have a great accomplishment. But the thing is, our teachers have multiple students that help and mentor and make a difference in their life. So I just wanted to kind of bring up that correlation. It just made me stop and think when I was watching this program. Our teachers do this all the time, and they're magnificent at it, and they make connections with students on a daily basis. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. And now it's time for board salutes, and today let's start at the other end, Mr. McFarland.
None at this time.
Lopez?
No.
Minnie?
No.
Ms. Johnson?
I don't have any.
I do have a couple. I visited last week. I didn't realize they ended so soon, so I had to kind of scramble to get to them. But I went to elementary and middle school, summer school, very impressed. The elementary, the boys, they had 360 students involved. They were teaching students language arts, reading, math. Wonderful. I saw a lot of kids there. There were some of my little guys from Enos that I mentor during the school year that were there, so it was kind of nice to see them. They were kindergartners last year. Middle school, the same thing. They were doing math, literature, and also they had the STEM program there, and a lot of students were taking advantage of that. So kudos to the principals and the teachers that are in those 2 summer school programs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
All right, at this time, discussion items. Does anyone have any old business they'd like to discuss? Mr. McFarland?
I've got a quick one. I just want to see if we have any follow-up in terms of future plans for TIF districts in the city. I know there's been a lot of discussion concerning the YWCA area around 5th and 4th Street. And I think before too long, we'll be starting to see a TIF plan put in place, and I think we need to be at the table for that. We passed a resolution February 17th of this year saying that we would reach out to the city and let them know about our intent to be, or our request to be involved in the process, and I just wanted to see if we have any follow-up from the city on that.
I have a community leaders forum this week, so I can broach the topic and see where they are and see what the timeline might be.
Thank you.
Any other further old business?
I have a question I'd like to ask.
Yes.
And I'm going to ask it out here in front of everybody. When people bring comments and statements and suggestions about schools, how are you going to deal with that, new superintendent? Just give me a general idea so that
For instance,
people will know.
what kind of comments are you
Well, like
referring to that I can help?
academic, I've had several people ask me what's going to happen over at Southeast High School, okay, after their report and their great things. And then there's been a couple schools that I have mentioned that I just want to make sure that they're not under the radar. They should be
I
at
would
least
say
be on the table.
every school's on the table and on the radar. I can tell you one thing about the graduation rate that we heard about a little bit. Quickly thereafter, I had a meeting with Cherie Morrison was at the table with me, and then also the high school principals and the guidance deans that were able to come this day. And we had a really long meeting about the graduation rates, and we're waiting. Ann, did you say into July we might know what from the state report?
All of our data is, all of our kids are exited out
Right.
after summer school. And then the date that the state board requests all data is cleaned up is August 15th. That's our deadline. So after that, we should have everything finished.
Okay. And that'll help us have this year's graduation rate. I would like to unpack that data further and make sure I can come to the board with a presentation that gives you a clear outlook on what that data means, what our schools are doing about that, what each individual school has as their rate versus the district rate overall. So anytime data is brought to the table or questions, I have no problem looking at that deeper and trying to find the story behind that and find the reasons for any discrepancy that we may see or any need for improvement.
There has
So no
been-
problem at all.
There has been over the years a number of very subtle and not so subtle changes in how it's calculated. It's calculated by the means described to you by the state board. And little changes in that can change your numbers dramatically. I remember having a high school that went from the 80s to the 90s, and they made one change, and the next year it went down about 10 or 12 points. It's a mystery to me how, in many cases, you can have, what they need to do is to take a look at it in a holistic way. You have, let's say, 1,000 freshmen coming in this next year. Following all of those through the continuum there, if a kid moves, you got to make sure that it's done in such a way that it doesn't count against your number. If a kid drops out and does go back to school, that it doesn't in fact count against you. And I mean going back to school later. But there's a lot of ways that they deduct things that you know are going on that are pretty good educationally. And I think you're right, Superintendent, that is clearly a very, very important issue. And
Just in response, though, to your original question, I think my cabinet already has had some meetings where they know we're going to look into I've been keeping them busy so far. And we want to make sure we understand what the situation is at all schools and support the principals in their endeavors to improve that school and see what we need to do to help them capitalize on what's working and help them move forward. And I think our integrated PD on June 9th really gave me an opportunity to sit in with every school for a brief moment and see what their action plans are and where they're headed. And I guess I should recognize that Sheila Boozer's sitting at our table for the first time officially tonight. So welcome aboard to your first official meeting, and she'll be by my side along with all the rest of my cabinet and making it work for you.
Okay, so, then one other thing. On the early out Wednesdays, are these buildings are they going to be required to show you an agenda or to give you some
Yes.
kind of idea of what
Yes, they are.
they're
Yes.
going to do?
Yep, and we have that, I have that ready to go. We'll roll that out to the principals on our first principal professional development day that we have. It'll be something that we've also negotiated with the union, and Krista's here, Wiedekamp from the union, and so we've already have a nice plan of how those days can be utilized, what they can be utilized for, and then each school will submit that plan, and we actually have a committee that will be in place to kind of help us make sure that we're using that time wisely.
Okay. I'm almost there.
No, you
My
can.
mind is still working. So on the early out Wednesdays, are we doing maybe some kind of reminder for parents now that they need to plan ahead for those children?
Yes, we have that on our agenda today, and we need to start that communication up again. We did a big push at the end of the school year, but now as we're gearing up, our balanced calendar is back in school before I think on the day of our next board meeting that week, so we need to make sure that we're ready to hit the ground running with our balanced calendar schools and then move forward with communication at registration.
Okay, and one final question. I'm going to go back to my original question and what you fed in the data. If you don't have to do your final report to ISB until August the 15th and school starts on August the 18th.
Well, that's for the graduation rate. We'll get it in before
But I mean, when you
then.
get the
That's when
kids
it's
going
required.
into school, we got to make sure we keep them there for next
That's
year so
right.
the numbers are going to be up.
That's right. We're already planning on how we can keep them in school, increase our graduation rate. We just don't have that rate for you for this past school year. The rates that we were looking at were from a whole school year in the past, so I want to make sure you have the most up-to-date data, and then we can have a deeper conversation about what those means. And I'd use that as an example of something that was brought to the board, and I was asked to look at it a little bit further, and I plan on coming back with some results for you.
That brings up a couple of
Thank you.
questions for me. If a student graduates early, they're not counted as graduating with that class, is that correct?
They are, they will be counted, like they graduate in January, are you saying?
Yes.
They will be in that four-year cohort. But if they graduate late, that does count against us.
So in other words, and that'd be interesting to see what percentage of students that fall into that category that just don't quite have enough credits to graduate. They may still be lacking a few, but they
But we're still
graduate the next
graduating
year.
them, yeah.
Do we have access to what percentage? Because that can make a
The
difference. then.
five-year cohort?
Yes,
Is that what you're saying?
yes.
Yeah, we have four-year and five-year graduation rates. The state calculates both of them. And our five-year rate, of course, is better than our four-year rate.
And how does,
But the official rate that is publicized all over the place is the 4-year.
Is the four-year rate.
You bet.
and how is mobility
That's a
factored into
problem.
that rate? In-
Mobility is,
Mobility, the four-year graduation rate is calculated, I'm going to quote it because I'm looking at it, I've got it since you guys started talking about it.
Thank you.
It's calculated by dividing the number of students who graduate in 4 years or less with a regular high school diploma by the number of students who form the adjusted cohort for that graduating class. So essentially, they calculate both a 4-year and a 5-year extended graduation rate. And it's based on the first-time ninth graders who would begin high school and graduate either 4 years later or 5 years later. But the students who stay in for the 5th year count against the district in a 4-year graduation rate.
What I would like to see, and I know the state doesn't care, whatever, I would like to see what our real graduation rate number is.
So would we,
And
and
that's-
that's the report I want to bring to
Yeah,
you. That's what we
exactly.
started to unpack, is where do these students go? I agree.
Because that's really kind of misleading, because we are
It's extremely-
graduating students. It's just,
Right.
you know, it's like college, not everybody gets out in 4 years.
And we have
Oh,
other
and also-
students that
Right.
are successfully graduating from other programs.
Exactly.
Like Lincoln's Challenge is one, that's a great program to help
And I
students
don't
who
even
have
know
that
if that
need. and
counts
they-
for us.
It doesn't.
It
And-
doesn't count. We
The
have to
same-
drop them as students in order for them to enter that
Yes.
program for funding. And so once we drop them, they go against our four-year cohort, although we're doing something to help them and move them forward in their lives.
And it goes back to the mobility too, and I like to see that factored in as well, because if a student moves to another city, it counts against us.
But we remove them from the cohort, so
Okay.
they're only counted.
It's just those kids that get
only
dropped
counted
for another
kids
reason.
who are in that cohort.
Yeah.
So that's the whole piece that is so hard for us, is that we have to account for all those kids who leave. So those kids are removed from the cohort.
Yeah, and we'll
Okay.
come back with more specific data as we move forward. That's an example of data that was brought to us that I'd like to report back to you on. So you asked me how I'd handle it, and that's what I do. Is the very next day I make a list of where we need to go and what's going on, and keep apprised of what's going on out in the buildings, and keep my eye on the data, and keep my eye on the culture of those schools, and most importantly, so.
But I think the point needs to be made for the community to understand those numbers are very misleading. Because we are graduating students, it's just they may not all make it out in 4 years. So I think that needs to be told as often as we can tell it, so it doesn't look like we're not graduating kids, because we are.
And guess what goes on the school report card?
Right.
It's the 4-year.
The 4 year.
And that's what ends up in the paper. Now you'll know something.
No pressure.
Yeah.
Now you know the truth.
Okay. Any more old business? Okay, hearing none, we'll go to new business. Any board members have any new business they'd like to discuss?
I have a question I'd like to ask Daryl. They're tearing down some houses over on Monroe Street.
Yes.
That's not our property, right?
No, that is not our property.
So somebody approached you about buying it?
It has been before, yes. It had some environmental issues, which I think that's what they were doing. And so I don't know what the owner's plan is for that property now. I'm sure it'd be available if we inquired.
Was that on Walnut or Monroe?
No, it's on Monroe.
On Monroe.
And it's right there at the
Just,
parking, end of the parking lot that's on there.
South of the southeast entrance.
Okay.
Any other new business? Hearing none, before we move on to Dr. Hill's discussion about board policy,
Yes.
Mrs. Gill has some
Well, we do have
introductions.
somebody in the crowd I'd like to introduce tonight, and it'll be approved later on in the agenda at 9.1, and that's approval of our new coordinator for safety and security for District 186, and that's John Philbrin. Did I say that correctly? All right, good. I'd like to introduce him tonight. He's been with the Springfield Police Department from 1976 to 2005, made a sergeant in 1994, a member of the emergency response team from 1999 to 2005, and he's also been the interim director of the Police Academy. Also the Deputy Marshal of the U.S. Supreme Court from 2012 to present. He's also a Springfield High School graduate and a Lincoln Land Community College student and SCI student here in Springfield. So once again, returning to our school district, and we're proud to have you, and I just wanted to introduce you. Do you have somebody with you today?
My wife Linda,
Okay.
she's my 911 backup.
That's right. They both work to support us in those crises. So I really look forward to working with you. Mr. Sanders, is there anything else you'd like to add, or?
Well, I just want to mention that during the time that we interviewed the candidates, we had a fantastic pool of candidates, and John, you made the cut, so that's really something. So we're very, very happy to have him on board. Just his familiarity with the community, with the police department, is going to be real good for us.
And Mr. Harris spoke very highly of you, too. So I know that he'll be working and helping us if any transition comes about. Once again, welcome aboard. And
Thank you.
we always try to do these announcements, so if you don't want to sit through the big policy update, you certainly don't have to. But welcome aboard, and we're very happy to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, at
Can
this-
I, before
Sure.
we move on, what's his name?
John Philbrin.
Okay. I don't know him, I've never seen him before, or whatever. So I think that it would be helpful for board members to have a bio on people who come through that we've never seen, don't know anything about. If
Sure.
that's a new policy, we can start.
Sure.
I might wanted to ask somebody something about him. And he's on the board, he's on the agenda for approval, and I don't know anything about him, so,
Okay.
yeah. We're all nice people, but, you know.
Okay, at this time, Dr. Bob Hill is going to give us a presentation on the board policy, which he's been working on diligently for the last few months, and this time,
Mr. Zimmers, Mrs. Gill, and members of the board, this is the fine print report, reading the fine print. I've kidded about this a couple of times, but it was quite an interesting endeavor to read all of this and think about what changes to recommend and which ones not to. I want to describe the procedure that I used and then suggest a way to proceed tonight, although that's really up to you. I parsed out various sections of the board policy to the department heads who were responsible for that particular section. They were very helpful in identifying areas that they knew weren't working or emphasizing things that did. I then conferred with the school code and statutes, and I know that Mrs. Johnson has mentioned several times the School Board Association has a variety of publications that are helpful. I used prototypes available through the School Board Association of other districts that are willing to put their board policy out on the internet as model work. And sometimes that was just cross-referencing to make certain that our citation of the school code hadn't changed, particularly with some of the ones that I recognize as having been in the book 30 years. It says something about me, I guess, that I could see one and go, gee, this hasn't, even though it said reviewed in 2005, I thought, I remember when we wrote this, long before that. At that point in time, I crafted the revisions. They were sent back to department chairs or department heads. I'm happy to report most of them found some grammatical errors and made a few little suggestions, but nobody sent me a message about had I fallen on my head when I wrote a certain section. You've had them for a while, so the purpose of tonight's meeting is for you to give me the input like the staff has. So I know before the meeting you received this document by which I went through every page that's in the report to let you know those that had been reviewed. If it says reviewed, it means they are in here just as they were before. If they're in red ink, there's some revision in them. And I would say 80% of those revisions are wordsmith revisions. If I used the word update or clarification, I thought that there was a better way to word something. It was usually based on a conversation that I had with somebody about something that didn't work, or I read it 3 times and went, what does this mean? I think it's important that the board policy be readable and understandable. In other cases, it makes reference to the law changed on this. We used to require kids to start school at age 7. Now we require them to start school at age 6 in Illinois. So wherever that is in here, it is reflected. So the way I would suggest we proceed is we'll go section by section. I'm not going to read all of these to you. I will start, like I'll say, section 100, answer whatever questions you have on 100. If there's an asterisk area in there and you don't ask about it, I'll talk about that, but I'm only going to talk about the asterisks unless you ask me about something. I want to apologize to those others in the audience. Really, it's not really an apology. Like, I know you're inconvenienced to listen to this talk by not reading this along with us, but trust me, whatever you daydream about as we discuss this will probably be more entertaining than if you were reading the fine print along with us.
This
At
is
the
just a
next-
part of a process.
That's right.
Yeah.
This is part of a working process. This is the chance for the board to give me their input before it's finalized, comes back to you to go on the books so that you can approve it and have revised board policy. So is it okay with you that we do the sections that way? So we'll start with 100, which is about district organization, and ask you if you have any questions in that section. Hearing none, I'll go to the asterisk section. A couple of years ago, the state required everybody to have goals for excellence, and at that time, the board chose to put them in board policy. Now with the new Illinois Learning Standards, that particular approach by ISBE is no longer current, so I'm suggesting you take your goals out of here. If you look at 126, you'll note that I wrote 126 in a way that suggests that your standing statement to yourselves and to the community about your roadmap would be in a strategic plan, and that every year you would update the goals and the measurable objectives of the goals based on your strategic plan. And that's an assumption I made. It's based on a lot of years of experience, and it wasn't reflected in here, although I did talk to Mrs. Gill a number of times, and I know the idea of having a strategic plan is not it's something that she advocates for and supports and so on. So, but I did change the section to reference a strategic plan that was not referenced in your board policy before. So if you approve this, it would say you're going to have a strategic plan downstream. Every year you will update your goals and objectives based on your advancement on the strategic plan. Any questions? Okay. Section 200 is the section about the Board of Education. I didn't asterisk anything in here, and what I would say, first of all, let me thank Julie Hammers for helping me on this one. The changes in here reflect the changes in the law, so you no longer file your petition to run for the school board with her, you file it with the county clerk, and all the timing and the numbers reflect current practice and policy, and it outlines in here what you do if there's a vacancy and so on. All that comes right out of either school code or municipal election codes and so on. So it's pretty boilerplate, this particular section. Anything that was updated, I think there's something in here about code of ethics for school board members. What was in there before was the last edition of that from the School Board Association. I went to the new one and dropped the new one in and took the old one out, just to make it current. So those are the changes in this section. I don't think there's anything to lose sleep over in that section. But again, Julie, thanks for your help, not only on that section, but on all of this, but very helpful on that section. Okay, the next area is 300, and that's about administration. Again, although I didn't star it, there was a section in here, 315.12, that had to do with the termination of the superintendent and resignation and so on. There was a reference in your old policy that had 70 years of age as a mandatory retirement age.
70 years?
Yes,
Oh, don't
70
worry.
years of age.
Don't worry.
You can tell how old that is. I know
Love
that I
you
was
all,
around when it was
but-
put in and why it was put in there. I consulted with Rob Cross, and we both agreed that's just a tripwire to have anything in there. Why invited age discrimination? And let's see, Jennifer, only
I have a lot of
30
longevity, but
more
I'm not
years,
sure
and
that
you'll be
much.
mandated to retire.
Swelling
I
crazy
just
people.
didn't think it had a place in here. I'm sure it's been in there 30 years. But all the other clarifications in there, just, if you will, update Code of Ethics updates to the Code of Ethics that it was taken from, and so on and so forth. Any questions on your administration? All right. 400 is business services, and there's a few in here to talk about, mostly having to do with the use of the buildings. Although there is a new one in here, 415.14, and I attached it to your handout. It didn't find its way in there. It was, Mr. Basco gave this to me in a timely manner 4 times, and I finally managed to get it in here. And I can't remember, Joe, was this a recommendation of the auditors?
One of the federal auditors.
One of the federal auditors recommended that we have a statement in here about following the code that is cited in here in our purchasing services. It basically assures that you're going to buy things of the right quality, that you're going to use allocated funds, that you're going to have an open bidding process. So you haven't seen that one before, but it's, like you can see, it's 3 lines, and it basically said we're going to follow the protocols. Before, I skipped over a couple. I'd like to look at 40502 and 40503, where I believed that some explanation was necessary. With very good intent, sometime in the recent past, the board changed its policy to enable stakeholder input to the budgeting process. And in an attempt to keep the spirit of what was in there alive and yet make it practical, I changed the wording, because the way it was worded before, literally we had community input around specific building level funding priorities before we ever set the budget in motion. So basically, people would be engaged in a phantom conversation. So I want to let you know, this reflected a conversation. Well, let me say it a different way. The policy as it was written was not being complied with. It was literally impossible to comply with it. So I think the way it's written now, it can be complied with, but I know, and I'm not certain if there are board members sitting here who were responsible for this being in here. So I am revealing to you an area that I changed without your input. So if you say, wait a minute, you overstepped your bounds, I will listen to that and try to go back and rework this. I'm doing wait time. That's what I was taught as a teacher to do. Okay. As it reads, it still provides for community input, just in a different way. Okay. 4053 is your board policy. The way it was written was that if the fund balance went under $20 million and then it caused you to do all those things. As a practical matter, that was a board policy I didn't know what to do with. Having just made the budget and knowing that the fund balance is nowhere around $20 million. So I guess, I'm sorry, it was actually 15 to 20% or $15 million. So if you'll bear with me, this is one of the few places that I'm going to read to you. If you look at the 3rd paragraph in 40503, I put, in a fiscal year when a final budget is presented to the board for approval in which the financial goals are not reflected in that final budget. In other words, you're getting a final budget and you don't have a fund balance of $15 million. That would be this year or years like it. The superintendent shall report to the board the rationale for why those goals are not reflected in the proposed final budget. And I think we did that when we made this budget. You would have had to cut $20 million from the budget to have a $15 million target, okay? Which we know then we couldn't have a school district. Then the next paragraph looks out into the future to bright days and says, in a fiscal year when the final budget is approved in which the fund balance goal is attained, the superintendent shall direct the development of a written report to the board at any time when the fund balance in any of the major fund categories named above falls below the goal. So if you start the year and you're there and you go below it, then that says the superintendent's got to report to you and either has to give you a rationale that you approve or fixes the problem. Okay, so it maintains the spirit of what was there before, because again, being respectful to the people that wrote that goal and why they did. But I tried to make it otherwise, the way it was written, actually to comply with board policy. Every single board meeting, Jennifer would have to be giving you a report on why there wasn't $15 million in there, technically, to comply with it. Okay? I need to consult my notes here. I think I'm down to 440.01, which is another one that I have with an asterisk by it.
You can skip the section for 800.
You can go.
No, I'm just joking.
Something on TV.
All right. Well, this is an important one, 440.01. This used to be about 3 pages long, give you all the provisions for free and reduced price lunches. No longer necessary. This one says everybody's entitled to a free lunch, in fact, 2 free meals. It also has a sentence in it that says food service can sell a la carte items as long as they meet the nutritional guidelines. And that is the new world that we will live in next year relative to free and reduced price lunches.
What happens with that policy if and when DNR decides not to continue with that?
Then you'll have to go back and change it.
Okay, there's no
Yeah.
fail-safe on that, okay.
Yeah. And I had, I had the same exact thought myself, Mr. McFarland. What if this is a 2-year experiment? We have change of administration, change of policy, all the things.
That's why we update the policy manual
That's
more
why you
more
update the
effectively.
policy, right, yeah. All right, now we get into an area that I think is real progress. And here I want to thank Daryl Shaver, Mike Morris, and others that referee building usage. There's probably not any place where we have to make more judgment calls relative to non-instructional operations in the district than in the use of the buildings. We all know we want to be good citizens in the community. We get lots of requests for use of the buildings. Technically, the buildings belong to the public and so on and so forth. And yet, how do we ensure in a reasonable way that the assets that are entrusted to us are taken care of and maintained, and that we don't use money that we're collecting in taxes to educate children to support the use of buildings by outside interests with non-educational purposes. So I'm not going to read through this. I'm just going to call to your attention that in 450.10 and in 450.10.02 and in 05, we've made a real run at making this read in a way that Daryl can administer it, that is fair to the public, that allows principals some flexibility in the use of their building, and always leaves the superintendent as the ultimate arbiter. On the other hand, I don't think you want Mrs. Gill to be spending a whole lot of her time hearing a bunch of these cases, and I hope the way this is written adds some clarity for Mr. Shaver. I will make this comment about 450.105. This is another policy that's not been adhered to by practice at the district. Technically, the way your board policy was written, every time we had a basketball game at one of the high schools and they did a 50-50 drawing at halftime, how many of those happen? A lot. Or whenever the PTA has a chili supper and they do a 50-50 drawing or a raffle, even if they went and got the license to do it, they were legal with the county, they were violating board policy. I've rewritten this to make it possible for people to do 50-50 drawings and so on. But there's a provision in here that says, in no case shall district facilities be used for functions that are scheduled primarily for conducting games of chance. So if somebody wants to come along and rent Grant Middle School and turn it into a bingo hall, that will keep you from doing that, okay? New territory, but we've been violating our own policy for quite some time, for obvious reasons. Okay, let's see, 45502. This actually shows up twice in here. It shows up here, and it shows up, it's totally redundant, it shows up in section 800 again. And the old policy used to say, generally speaking, the board in a district doesn't want to loan its stuff out. That it's just not good practice. But on the other hand, there are a few situations that arise almost every year when someone wants to borrow something that we've got, tables, chairs, something like that, and whatever they're going to borrow them for, they're going to raise money and give the money back to us to spend on kids or something like that. So we end up loaning the tables or chairs. Not often, but on rare occasion. The problem with the way the policy was written before, it did not require that to be memorialized in writing. The new policy does. And it gave no assurance to the district that the people would bring the materials back in a timely manner, in good shape, and if they broke or ruined them, to pay for what they broke. So that's what the new policy does. How many times a year do we loan anything out, Daryl? Once, twice?
Yeah, usually it's within the building. So.
Yeah. So it's not going to happen, but if it's going to be in here and we're going to do it, I wanted to add some protection for the district. Okay, any questions from you all on 400? 500. 500 is on personnel. 501. Amend your section on criminal background check. It's kind of the negative reverse, if you will, of Mrs. Johnson's point earlier, and I might ask in this personnel section whether or not you want to make it a matter of practice or you want to make it policy that when certain levels of employees are hired, that we provide a resume for you, but people with supervisory responsibility. I think it's okay that it be a practice, but if the board wants to make it policy, you could ask me to put it in here and it would fit in easily. This is the reverse. This is the one that says we do these criminal background checks. We find dings in criminal background checks. The school code states the kinds of things we can't hire an employee for, but people that work in this profession or in our district are not any different than the general population. People might find a ding or two show up somewhere. Never the kinds, we don't ever hire anybody that we believe is a threat to children. But this policy says if the superintendent recommends a hire to you, you should know that the background check produced, I'm using the word somebody taught me. I don't know if that's a technical word or it's actually a reporter taught me the word, a ding in the background check. Looking at Jason to know if that's the way you guys all talk. Okay, all right. Now, this is gonna make work for HR, and means that your personnel packets are gonna look a little different, and take a little more time. So, this one's kind of out of the blue. I would suggest you think about this one before you put it in. But I've given it to you, what my rationale is, and you can decide whether you want it in there.
Well, didn't that, I'm trying to think, the legislature passed a bill, I don't know if it's signed or not, about asking about criminal background checks on applications or something. What was that? Remember that? What was that?
I'm looking it up. I think I know what you're talking about.
But I don't,
Oh,
I mean, if we pass that, if the legislature passed that, and you run into something on the criminal background check,
Yeah.
I mean, how do you?
well, always if the legislature passes, law always supersedes your policy. So my recommendation is, and if that happened, I missed it, but there's possibility of things that just passed 30 days ago would be the most likely things I missed. I tried to stay in tune. Okay, I'll do some more research on that before.
Yeah, I'll look it up and see.
Right. The other one I want to mention in here, 500.50, in one section of this about students' use of tobacco on property, I clarified that electronic smoke devices, electronic cigarettes were banned also, but I forgot to do it here in the adult section, so that just needs to be added for the next meeting.
You said 500.50?
Yeah.
Do you have your packet there?
Pardon?
Do you have your packet with you there?
I do.
It just isn't, am I looking at this right? 500.50
Oh,
in the
it's
actual
60.
packet
It's
is
because it's
general personnel
500.
records, so,
It's
oh,
six.
so it's
It's
60.
500.60.
Okay.
I duplicated 500, so that is actually 500.60. Thanks for the catch. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, because the right 500.50 is about personnel records maintenance. Okay? All right. Good there? 600. This is about instruction. All right. So right off the bat, section 600 changes so that it's coherent with new state law and the Illinois learning standards as opposed to old state law and the goals for learning. So this is pretty much taken right out of IS. This is pretty much boilerplate ISBE language, okay? The next one is 62504. This is some rewriting of the controversial issues area. I will admit to you that I was a little bit influenced to rewrite this by the Second Amendment thing that I refereed this year. I just looked back on that and said, what's there to learn from this? So I tried to write this in a way that would be helpful to Mrs. Gill next year when she has to do that, or something like that. She didn't hear that.
I'm not listening, sir. Tuning you out.
I did not put a check mark by 65509 about graduation requirements. You know, you all changed the graduation requirements when you went to the 7-period day, but they weren't changed in board policy, and I think I understand why, because the 7-period day was in an MOU, so on and so forth, so you waited until this update. I said this in cabinet, and I will say it to the board, that one thing I'm certain of is that requiring 26 credits for kids to graduate on the 7-period day is a very high bar. No one on this board or in this school district will ever have to apologize for having anything other than extremely high standards. When we had 20 credits for graduation, when Chuck and I were building principals on a 6-period day, you had to pass, 5 periods was the customary schedule, but a kid taking only 5 periods a day, if they passed them all, could graduate. There's not even that much leeway when you have to get 20. If there's 7 chances, that'd be 28, and if you only took 6, that'd be 24. 6 times 4. You can't even take 6 periods out of 7 your 4 years in high school and meet the graduation requirements. Now, I'm not suggesting you ought to lower them. I am just calling to your attention that they are high. And I would love for somebody to do the study, what the impact is of that on your graduation rate. Because that is a change that was introduced intentionally here. I could speculate. Okay, section 700. The good news is the farther back we get in this, the fewer of these things there are to draw your attention to. 720 is a new piece of language, so that wasn't in your packet. That was in what I handed out to you tonight. And you will see under student welfare a section that talks about the well-being of students being a partnership between parents and staff at school, and it suggests that we take this partnership seriously, and that in helping kids solve the problems that we work with families, and that we always take into account the well-being of the student in concert with family. It suggests that, it goes to the story that Mr. Zimmer's told, and we all know in Springfield that the kind of thing that you saw on television, we've had teachers for years in this district faced with the same kind of situations. We would never want to be in one of those situations and be at odds with the family. On the other hand, I've added a provision at the end of this that says in no way does this trump the fact that we're mandated reporters of child abuse, child neglect, and so on. And that's not the intent. Okay? All right, that's new policy. That's my last check mark. So I'll hold space for your comments, your directives. The plan, once we finish this meeting, is to take all the red markups out of here, do the final edits for grammatical correctness, and make them all say revised or reviewed 0814, so that you have them at the next meeting for approval at the first meeting in August.
Are you going to save all of the various markups and iterations of
Oh,
this?
yeah, I'll save a marked up, I'll
As
save a
good
marked up
history.
version and give you a clean version.
Good.
Well, thank you.
Yes, thank you very
Yes,
How
much.
many
thank you
hours you
very
got
much.
into this?
I don't know, I don't even want
The
to count.
required hours that he
I'm
has to-
telling you, it's be a bunch.
I only fell asleep at my desk once during this project. It was on one of those Mondays where I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and drove back down here.
We shook him up. We
And
shook him
about
up. Don't
3
worry about
o'clock
it.
in the afternoon, I nodded off. And the ladies in the personnel office, where I now have a desk, claim that I'm the only person that's ever done that.
Ever fallen asleep?
Yeah. At my desk.
I'm on notice. That's frowned
Oh, I know
upon.
some people way back that fall asleep at those desks.
But,
Wasn't me, of course.
Truthfully, now that it's done, I think it will take little effort to keep it current. Once a year, you've got very capable people to do it, and I'm more than willing to, I've said this already to Mrs. Gill, if she wants me to commiserate with someone that she asks to do this, I'd be happy to do so, and I think you can easily keep it. Now, one of the things I didn't mention is that I'm also responsible for rules and regs, so once this is all done, I'll start on rules and regs. And I actually have more staff input on rules and regs than I do on this, because that's what they really live with day to day. So, Mr. Sanders alone gave me 200 pages of notes on rules and regs.
No, I appreciate it,
He's just
Dr. Hill.
getting
This is,
started.
I mean, we were out of date by far on several of these, so I appreciate it greatly. And it's really important that we understand that how all of these policies are interconnected with one another. Many of them really go together as a bundle and really support the work we do each and every day. So I appreciate this greatly.
And please know that there's absolutely no pride of authorship in this, and it's really important that this work for you all, the board. The ultimate say is not in staff input and so on. So if there's some part of this that, as you think about it more, it goes, this just doesn't work for me as board policy, please speak up and make it work for you. I've given it tried to think like a board member in doing this. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Put on the CDs, so it can be searchable, but there's no numbers.
Okay. At this time, we'll turn it over to Joe Basco for our financial report.
President Zimmer's, members of the board, attached is a summary of revenue and expenditures for the month of June 2014 for the education and the operations and maintenance funds. An accounts receivable outstanding report is also attached. As of June, outstanding state payments totaled $369,000. For the month, the Ed Fund had revenues of $31.9 million. Expenditures were $9.4 million, with revenues exceeding expenditures by $22.5 million. The Operations and Maintenance Fund had revenues of $5.7 million, with expenditures of $1.9 million. Revenues exceeded expenditures by $3.8 million.
Thank you. All right, and you're going to turn it over to me for the superintendent's report. Are there any questions about that? Or
Yes.
Okay.
So as of June 1, June 30, state just owed us, as of the state's fiscal year of July 1, how much did they owe us?
The $369,000.
That's all they owe us.
Yeah, we got paid, our quarterly claim payments came in a few months earlier than before, so they're on time with all but one of those.
Okay. All right, anything else on that?
Any other questions?
All right, well, I just wanted to really second your talk about the summer school programs. They went great this summer. Went in and watched them learning just like they were in a regular school year, and the students were at the last day. I went to both programs on the last day, and they didn't want to leave. So that's a great thing to have that active of a program. And I got some specific data back on some students that showed marked growth over the summer, and that will actually prevent them from possibly being retained in their grade level. So I'm very proud of the work that went in by the teachers and the staff that give some of their summer time up to really provide a program that's going to support students. Another thing I wanted to report out is that, of course, with the help of Mr. Sanders, we have a bullying committee. There's some new legislation out there that I'm sure the public is aware about and is reading about regarding the bullying policies in the district. And we do have a committee in place that's not only looking at that law deeply to make sure that anything we already have in place with our bullying policy needs to be updated, but we're also looking at usage of a bullying report form that we'd like to bring to the Board of Education at a future time to present to you, as well as a set of procedures. And also we're shoring up how we collect our data and report cases of bullying within our schools so that we can have better report programs to really meet the letter of the law. And we felt like we were really ahead of the game because we already had a bullying liaison committee in place and already had a policy in place, and we felt very strong that we were able to comply with the new state law components. Mr. Sanders, is there anything else that I didn't cover with what your committee's been working on? And I know you have another meeting coming up and you're working throughout the summer, and I thank the teachers who are willing to use their summer time also to meet with us so that that's ready to go, present to the administrators at our first opening day, because we don't want to let that go into the school year. We want to start the school year with everybody having communication about that. Later on in your some of our approval of purchasing and financing agreements, we'll be talking about a proposal with NetTech to upgrade our connectivity in the district, and that's in the regular budget that we have budgeted for technology, but we talked about how that money's being spent in that technology budget. One of the things that we need is a very strong backbone to build our wireless structures throughout the district and also increase our wireless capacity. As we're getting ready for the park assessment, that's going to be an online assessment. That's going to be a very important thing for students to have connectivity and not be dropped during the assessment. As we improve upon our use of iPads in the buildings too, that's another piece. So we're kind of thinking through the future, and we do have a 5-year plan for payment that's interest-free, so that we'll be kind of using that over the next 5 years to really improve. It says upgrades to our networking infrastructure to 1 gigabyte, not upgrades necessary, so that we can really support our wireless infrastructure. It's going to accommodate the iPad usage greater so that we don't have as many drops or places in buildings where we don't have support. And it gives the district a network foundation to build on for several years to come. So it's a piece of the pie already in the budget, but I wanted to explain that to you a little bit more. And once again, I can't thank Dr. Hill enough for the work he's done on the policy, because once again, there really shouldn't be anything that happens in a district that we can't hang our hat on a policy within our policy manual. So I really appreciate you helping upgrade that in a timely manner so we start the school year off with that. So that's really all I have with my superintendent's report. So we'll do the consent action items. 8.1, approval of consent action items. I recommend consent action item 8.2 through 8.11 as described in the corresponding resolutions.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? Second, okay. Any discussion?
Just on 8.6, I'll be abstaining due to my employment.
I do have a question. Can you tell me a little bit about the agreement with Mosaic? What does that involve?
That is the 4th year of their program. That was a 3-year grant, and they got funding for a 4th year of the program that will be supporting Washington and Matheny. And also there's discussion about bringing on 2 other schools as a part of that too. And that just provides support for families on sites and social work and really connection with all of our community resources. Lou, is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Just Southeast is also.
Southeast, and is it Harvard Park too, or are they?
Harvard Park is one of the schools we're looking at bringing on for
Okay.
next year.
Okay. And it basically just provides supports for the families right in the school and provides access for students to receive the supports they might need with social work, et
So it's
cetera.
basically just an extension of the grant?
Yeah, it's an extension of a program that's really been working quite well at Washington and Matheny, and they were able to secure the 4th year of funding, and hopefully we'll be able to secure more funding in the future. It's a very good program that supports students, and there's a lot of interest for that in the community.
Any other questions?
Do you want to comment, Mrs. Gill, on the arrangement with Mrs. Treadwell? I think that's a win-win
Wonderful.
for
It
the
is.
district, for the Real Men Read participants, and I give you and Mrs. Treadwell credit for coming up with that.
Yeah, it was creative funding opportunity for certain, but Donna had some other opportunities come her way, but she did not want to leave our district in the lurch, and one of her position was cut. And so she has some other options in the community, but we have negotiated a contract with her that'll be voted on tonight to continue our Roman Read program through consulting with Mrs. Treadwell. And it's going to make sure that the integrity of that program is kept in place, our volunteers, their needs are met, and also they're coordinated, and that's an important thing. We work very close with the Scholastic program to get the books and get those programs out into the schools, get those delivered to schools, make sure our volunteers are set up with their days, and our principals feel supported with the volunteers that come in to do the Roman Read program. And that is, once again, a monthly opportunity for a man within our community to go into the classrooms, read with the students. They read either a portion if it's a chapter book, or maybe the whole book if it's a picture book or storybook, and then the students each get a copy of that book that they take with them home. So it's a way we were able to keep that program and keep those volunteers in place, but work creatively. And we're still working to fill the gaps that might be felt with that volunteer position, but we will be able to do that within our current staffing. Thank you for bringing that up.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, call the roll.
Funderburg.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lopez.
Aye.
McFarland.
Aye, with abstention on 8.6.
Zimmers.
Aye.
Flonita.
Aye.
That is 6 aye votes with the noted abstention on 8.6.
Okay, next is roll call items. 9.1, approval of personnel recommendations.
President Zimmers and members of the board, the superintendent recommends adoption of the personnel recommendations as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
I guess I just want to state that in these, we are approving the hiring of Cindy Baher as principal at Grant Middle School and Donna Jefferson as principal at Du Bois, and they'll be able to attend our next board meeting. Both had things going on tonight. So I'll introduce and do all that then.
Hearing no other questions, we'll take a roll.
Johnson.
Aye.
Lopez.
Present.
McFarland.
Aye.
Zimmers.
Aye.
Flamini.
Aye.
Funderburg.
Aye.
That is 5 aye votes and 1 present. Motion carries.
Okay, that's the end of this particular school board meeting. Our next board meeting will be July 21st, again, starting summer hours at 6 o'clock. Everybody have a great week. Thank you.
Thank you.